Two yellow bicycles lay on their sides near the edge of a shallow creek, the morning frost still clinging to their handlebars. It was 2014, and in this small town of Hollis Bend, Oregon, scenes like this had begun to feel painfully familiar. Another child is gone. Another quiet street turned into a search grid. What they uncovered in the days that followed would pull the whole town into something far darker than a simple missing person call. Hollis Bend sat about an hour southeast of Portland, the kind of place where people rarely locked their doors and kids walked to school in little clusters. Fewer than 6,000 residents lived there, spread across modest streets lined with Douglas firs. Before the disappearances started, the town's biggest concerns were the annual river flooding and the gradual closure of old mills. Nothing that prepared anyone for what came next. The first missing child was 8-year-old Lucas Danner in March 2012. Lucas had been walking the 2 blocks between his home and a neighbor's house when he didn't arrive. His mother, Ellen, called the police within an hour. Locals helped search, deputies combed the woods behind Orchard Street, but nothing surfaced. No footprints, no clothing, not even a dropped toy. For a while, many assumed it was an isolated tragedy, maybe an abduction by someone passing through. But then, it happened again. The second child, 9-year-old Madison Pike, vanished in September 2012. She'd been riding home from an after-school art club. Her bicycle was later found propped neatly against a chain-link fence, its kickstand down, the seat still warm when officers arrived. That small detail unsettled investigators. It suggested she had stopped willingly. It suggested familiarity. By the time a third child, 11-year-old Nolan Perkins, disappeared the following spring, people in Hollis Bend had begun to change their habits. Parents walked their kids right to school entrances. Hardware stores sold out of security cameras. Neighbors who had known each other for decades spoke in lowered voices, trying to make sense of something that refused to make sense. Investigators from the Oregon State Police joined the case in mid-2013. One of them, Detective Sandra Keating, kept a meticulous timeline pinned across her office wall. She later described the early phase of the investigation as looking at a forest through fog. No obvious connections, no witnesses, no threats mailed to the families, no shared routes except that all 3 kids lived within a mile of the Oxbow Creek trail system. Keating's team focused there first. The trail system wound behind homes, through pockets of dense brush, and carved across old service paths from the town's logging past. Deputies found signs of camping, empty cans, charred logs, a torn tarp, but nothing that directly tied to the disappearances. People used the trails often. Hikers and teenagers, sometimes travelers sleeping rough. Still, officers photographed everything. Town rumors swelled, as they often do when official answers run thin. Some residents blamed a reclusive man who lived in a rust-colored trailer near the woods. Others blamed passing truckers. A few whispered about older stories, strange sightings along the river decades earlier, but investigators wrote all that off as fear filling the vacuum. Then came the first strange break. In August 2014, a fisherman found a small red backpack along the east bank of Oxbow Creek. Inside were damp notebooks, a pencil case, and a library card belonging to Nolan Perkins. The backpack had no tears, no signs it had drifted long distances. Investigators believed it had been placed there deliberately and recently. That discovery shifted the investigation's tone. Someone wanted it found. Detective Keating examined the pack personally. The contents were dated to months before Nolan vanished. No fingerprints beyond Nolan's. But there was one detail that stuck with her. A faint smell of wood smoke, recent enough to cling to the fabric. Investigators broadened their search for makeshift camps again, this time focusing on signs of someone who might be moving locations often. A handful of sites looked lived in, but none yielded anything meaningful. For the town, fear deepened, especially because the disappearances occurred months apart, never following a pattern tight enough to predict. That randomness made Hollis Bend feel unsteady. It also made parents terrified of ordinary routines. Around late 2014, the investigation took another unexpected turn when a retired postman named Victor Hale approached police. Hale had lived in Hollis Bend his whole life, and he mentioned something that struck detectives as odd. He remembered seeing the same white panel van near the Oxbow trailhead on the afternoons of two disappearances, Nolan's and Madison's. He had assumed at the time it belonged to a contractor or surveyor, but after the third child went missing, the memory bothered him. Hale described the van as older, mid-1990s, with no visible decals and a dent near the rear bumper. Detectives searched DMV records for local owners matching that description. They found dozens, then filtered out commercial plates. Eventually, 4 names remained. Officers visited each address. 3 owners cooperated immediately, showing their vehicles, repair documents, and timesheets. All cleared.
The 4th was a man named Jared Haskins, 36 years old, living alone in a small rental on Briar Road. Haskins wasn't home during the first visit, and neighbors said he often kept odd hours. He worked seasonally at a lumber processing facility about 40 minutes away, and sometimes disappeared for days. Hunting trips, they said. His van matched the description almost perfectly. Officers towed it for processing after spotting expired tags during a follow-up visit. Inside, they found work gloves, rope, and paint cans. Normal enough. But what bothered investigators most was the smell. Not foul, not chemical, just smoky. The same faint wood smoke Detective Keating had noted on Nolan's backpack. Still, nothing inside the van was illegal, and without evidence directly linking Haskins to the disappearances, detectives had to release it to him within a week. He didn't argue. He quietly took the keys and drove away. The next development came from somewhere investigators didn't expect: a wildlife camera. A pair of local biologists had placed motion-activated cameras along a ridge above the Oxbow trails to track deer activity. When detectives reviewed the footage, they found a blurry, distant image from October 2014, a child-sized figure walking with an adult toward a clearing. The video was grainy, taken at dusk, but the size and hair length suggested a possible match for Madison Pike. The adult figure appeared to lead her by the wrist. What unsettled detectives most was the adult's posture, not forceful, more like someone guiding a child who trusted them. The image quality was too poor to identify anyone, but the timestamp placed the sighting 3 hours after Madison was last seen. That meant she had still been alive for a window officials hadn't known existed. Investigators returned to the clearing shown in the video. The ground had been disturbed many times since, weather, hikers, animals, but they did find something small. A charm from a bracelet, gold-colored, shaped like a star. Madison's mother confirmed she'd owned one like it. The town grew quieter. The local school hired extra staff to walk children home. Community meetings filled the elementary gym with anxious faces. People talked less about suspects and more about strange behaviors they'd noticed in neighbors or coworkers or strangers who had moved through town recently. Police sifted through every tip. Most went nowhere. Then in January 2015, a woman named Ruth Carmine contacted detectives with something she didn't think mattered until she heard about the charm. Ruth lived near a trail entrance and walked her dog early each morning. She recalled seeing a man crouched near a tree stump on the morning after Madison went missing. She said he looked like he was burying something small or tucking something into the dirt. The man had turned his face away when she passed. Her description wasn't perfect, but she remembered a few details. Tall, thin, wearing an orange jacket faded near the shoulders. Detectives felt a twinge of recognition. They had seen an orange jacket before during the visit to Haskins' home. He'd worn one when he came to the door, sleeves frayed, sun-bleached. Police questioned him again. He repeated the same story. He was working a shift on the night Madison disappeared. Timesheet records seemed to support him, though his supervisor later admitted workers sometimes filled their own hours when management wasn't present. Nothing tied him directly to the clearing or the trail. Frustrated, detectives doubled back to re-interview families. They weren't looking for grief this time. They were looking for patterns, for shared routines, for any detail the families might have overlooked the earlier shock. A connection finally surfaced. All 3 children had attended the same weekend nature club at Oxbow Community Center. The club was run by a mix of volunteers and rotating staff, but one name showed up repeatedly on sign-in sheets: Jared Haskins. He'd volunteered during 2 of the seasons the children attended. He'd taught basic outdoor skills, map reading, and plant identification. Many kids liked him. He was quiet, patient, and attentive. That detail alone wasn't enough to implicate him, but it was more than investigators had before. A search warrant followed, this time covering Haskins' home, vehicle, and digital devices. Officers combed through every drawer and storage box. They found a collection of maps marked with handwritten notes, circles around trail intersections, creek bends, and remote clearings. Many circles overlapped the same regions where evidence had surfaced. But still, no direct proof. One of the detectives mentioned later that the most unsettling part of the search wasn't what they found, it was what they didn't find. No photos of friends or family, no childhood memorabilia, nothing that rooted Haskins to people. His life seemed to exist in a blank, quiet space. A man hard to place anywhere, except the woods he knew so well. Forensic technicians studied soil samples from the maps, Haskins' boots, and several trail sites. They couldn't tie anything conclusively to the children. Weather and time had erased too much.
The investigation stalled through most of 2015. Families of the missing children held vigils by the river. A memorial tree near the school is filled with ribbons. Hollis Bend kept living, but in a dimmer way. Then, in October 2015, an early-season storm brought down part of an old cedar near Oxbow Creek. A hiker reported seeing something tangled in the exposed roots. Deputies arrived and discovered a shoe, small, mud-stained, and unmistakably belonging to a child. Forensic analysis later confirmed it matched one from Lucas Danner's pair. The shoe had been wedged deep, suggesting it had been placed there long before the storm exposed the roots. Again, deliberately hidden. The search expanded around the uprooted tree. Officers sifted through layers of leaves and soil, but found nothing more. Still, the discovery revived the investigation. Detectives returned to every detail they had collected, every map, every witness statement, every odd sighting. When they overlaid the locations of found items, the backpack, the charm, the shoe, one thing became clear. All fell within areas Haskins had circled on his maps. But geography isn't evidence. By 2016, Haskins had become a shadow in the case. Not charged, not cleared. He moved houses twice, changed seasonal jobs, and eventually left Hollis Bend entirely. Police traced him to small towns further south across Oregon, but nothing new surfaced. The disappearances stopped after he left. Some investigators believed that was a coincidence. Others didn't. Detective Keating once said the case felt like a book with missing chapters. The pieces were there, scattered and thin, but the center was hollow. Someone knew how to walk through that town without leaving footprints, she said in a later interview. Someone who understood space, silence, and timing. Years passed. By 2019, the official investigation remained open but inactive. Families kept in touch with law enforcement, hoping for new tips. Hikers still reported abandoned campsites occasionally, but none connected to the case. In 2021, a team of volunteer searchers revisited parts of the trail system using newer scanning equipment. They found bits of metal, old tools, animal remains, normal wilderness debris, but none of the children. To this day, the disappearances remain unsolved. Hollis Bend has new residents now, many who don't recognize the names etched on the memorial tree. But the older families remember. They still close their doors earlier than they once did. They still listen carefully when the woods go quiet. The final detail released publicly came from a box of evidence cataloged but never used. Inside was one of Haskins' maps, the edges worn soft. In the margin, barely noticeable, was a small pencil note. Safe places don't stay safe forever. No one ever figured out what he meant, or who he wrote it for. But for the families in Hollis Bend, the question that lingers isn't about one man. It's about how 3 children vanished from a town that small, along trails so familiar without anyone hearing a sound. And why nothing ever came back except their things. After laying out the final detail, you just ease into a quiet note about how the case still hangs over the town and how the families are still waiting for answers that never came. Nothing dramatic, nothing pushy, just a gentle reminder that the story isn't tied up and there are still pieces missing. Don't forget to like and comment your thought. Subscribe so you won't miss the next case on the channel.